as much information as we possibly can. Now, today I am also accompanied by a lovely guest speaker called Margaret, because obviously this topic is quite a sensitive one, and it's not something that we felt completely equipped to deal with, as I'm sure most of you will understand. Obviously, I can provide advice today on the kind of legal obligations that you have with your staff and the best practice, but there's going to be parts of today's session that I am going to pass through to Margaret for her to provide her specialist advice. So we shall get started. As I say, that's just a bit about us. I think a lot of you today are clients already of Bhayani Law, so very, very nice to see you all. But if you are not, then this is just a little bit about us, and you can get a copy of these slides after today's session if you want to read more about how we can help and support you. As usual, any questions that you have throughout the webinar, please pop them in the chat box. I have got one of my colleagues on the call today as well, who is monitoring that. So we will aim to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. It may be that as we go through, I answer some of the questions that you've already got, but if you want to just pop them in the chat as you go through, you're absolutely fine to do that. If it is just a quick one, then I might be able to just answer it at that time. If we do run out of time, hopefully we won't, but if we do, then please do feel free to email your questions to us after today's session, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. All right. So what we will cover today. So these are the kind of 5 key things we wanted to make sure we covered in today's session. So the impact of bereavement and grief on employee well-being and on performance, how to effectively support your staff navigating loss, managing difficult conversations. Now, this is really where we are going to be leaning on Margaret to provide that, as I say, specialist support in this area. Oh, sorry, I think that might have been my laptop. It is likely that the mental health of your staff is where a lot of this support is going to be positioned towards, obviously having a huge effect dependent upon the circumstances of the loss that they have suffered at the time. And we're also going to be touching on policies, effective bereavement policies. Now, I'm sure I will repeat this as today's session goes on, but of course, when we're looking at the topic of bereavement, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all situation. So it's going to be very difficult to provide a kind of one document that for all circumstances is going to deal with the step-by-step process that you need to go through, as you would expect to see in a disciplinary policy, for example. So we're just going to kind of work through that together to see if we can come up with some key points that are going to be helpful putting down to paper and to kind of manage everybody's expectations in those circumstances. So first of all, I think some of these things do kind of go without me needing to say them, but I do think they're important to consider because you may not have considered all of the impacts that this bereavement may have on your staff. And again, circumstances may differ dependent upon the individual, the nature of the bereavement and the loss that they have suffered. So reduced concentration, focus, and decision-making ability. They may be physically at work, they may be engaging at work, but they may just not be, firing on all cylinders. They may feel a mental stress that they may not be able to articulate, and therefore appear that they are present and engaged, but actually that concentration or that focus is really not there. Obviously, their mind is elsewhere on their personal lives. Of course, increased absenteeism or presenteeism, as I say, that they're physically at work, but they're disengaged. They're not tuned into where they need to be. Fatigue, sleep disturbances, and physical health impacts. Of course, I'm sure we're all aware of the physical impact that stress has on the body. That can show itself in many different ways. And therefore, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have lost this person in your life and therefore are going to respond in this way. It's going to be very, very different for most people. Changes in behaviour, mood swings. It's not necessarily that they're just going to be sad or at a loss. There may be frustration, there may be anger, and that may come out in different ways. So there is going to be an expectation of maybe more of an allowance than you would in other circumstances. Should grief be, being portrayed in that way with those individuals. Increased risk of mental health issues. So this isn't necessarily going to be an immediate issue when somebody has returned from compassionate leave or bereavement leave. This may be something much, much further down the line, the impact that it may have had on their mental health, the other issues that come with that, the financial issues, if they are an executor to the will of the deceased. This could continue for months and potentially into years of the of sorting the estate or a house, or there may be a number of different things, which could result in ultimately in burnout, in them dealing with everything they have at home, plus with everything at work. And again, with anxiety and depression, I think is a very common result and something that you probably would expect to see impacting your staff, unfortunately, in those circumstances. There may be the potential for strained workplace relationships, and again, the impact on productivity. So they may just have lost their motivation. They're not particularly bothered about the work that they are undertaking at the moment. The quality of work, their attention to detail is not going to be particularly where it was. And again, this is going to be a little bit of a sliding scale. It's not going to be, okay, it's been 2 weeks, I feel loads better now. I'm all fixed. It may go a little bit of a roller coaster. And it is just being aware and receptive to that. But these are the kind of key impacts that you're likely to see if you do have staff dealing with these situations in their personal life. So supporting them, again, this is not a one size fits all, but I did just want to hit a number of key points that you may want to consider when you are looking to support your staff in these circumstances. Of course, this is completely out of your control. It's also completely out of their control. And it's likely they are going to feel very, very lost in being able to control that situation around them. So you may have members of staff that absolutely want to be in work. They want to have a focus. They want to do something that is not dealing with the issue that they have in their personal life. And therefore creating that culture of empathy and compassion from the very, very beginning is going to be really, really helpful in allowing your staff to feel that they are being supported and they are able to return to work. Now, that's obviously not something that just happens at the point of you deciding, okay, we're going to be an empathetic employer. That culture is something that takes work and takes time. And I know we've done lots and lots of work with lots of our clients in relation to their values, in relation to their company culture, managing difficult conversations. That all creates and assists in creating that culture. So if you feel that's not something that you're currently very happy with within your workplace, if you think actually that's something that we could really, really work towards improving, but you're not quite sure how to do that, please do get in touch. And it's certainly something that we can assist you with in changing and adapting to that culture. Your managers, your senior leadership team are going to be key to that. They're going to be absolutely key in creating that culture and driving that forward so that your staff do feel supported and do feel that you are empathizing with their situation, whatever that may be at the time. Hand in hand with that really is open communication. If you let your employees know, okay, it is okay to talk, you have these people that you may feel comfortable to talk to, don't just leave that to your line manager or your HR manager. Is there somebody else that would feel comfortable being a buddy in that situation? Is there somebody that you can point them towards? Of course, they will have hopefully their own smaller circle of support, but is there an additional arm that you can offer as an employer to allow them to speak to you if they feel able to? You also really need to consider any cultural or religious differences in grieving practices, okay? And this isn't just necessarily an assumption. This is something that you can speak to your staff about. How is it that we're best to support you? Is there anything that we need to be aware of in terms of when the funeral needs to be in relation to your religion or relation to your culture? Is there a certain period of grieving process where you're not going to be working during that time? That even prior to any loss being happening. Really, consider the way that you grieve in your culture or in your religion is not necessarily going to be the same with all of your staff. And so having some knowledge and being able to speak to your staff about how it is best that you can support them in their circumstances is going to really set you up for success in moving forward and ultimately ensuring that they feel supported and able to come back to work when the time is right for them. Providing flexible working arrangements or additional leave. Now, we are going to go on to the legal obligations of what you have to provide, what you should provide, but it may be outside of that where it's not necessarily appropriate for them to still be on compassionate leave, or they feel able to work potentially with adjustments. So, grief can really affect energy levels, emotional well-being. It may be that they're absolutely fine, but come 3 o'clock, they feel absolutely exhausted. Their brain, has been going at 1,000 miles per hour, and the stress that is adding to that is just not going to be a long-term fix throughout that day. Is there any way we can adjust start times? So you start a bit earlier, you finish a bit earlier, or you can temporarily work from home or work from home a few days a week if that is going to help with that energy levels and essentially that burnout that may come after a period of bereavement. Obviously, this may not be possible in all circumstances. A phased return to work or reducing workload, again, is not going to be possible across the board for everybody. But if you think in your working environment that would be possible, or in those departments, that's certainly something that we could offer. You don't necessarily have to advertise it at this point, but on a case-by-case basis, you can, at your discretion, allow an adjustment to be made. That advice does come with a caveat, of course, because anything I say always does. You need to be very careful how you are presenting that additional support. Ensure that that is done on whilst yes, on a case-by-case basis, but so it cannot be seen as discriminatory. So, for example, if you have over the past 2 years, for example, you may have 5 employees who have suffered a bereavement of a very close family member. Have they been treated dramatically differently? Have they been treated in similar circumstances? If the reason they have been treated differently is because of their job role or because of an approach that they led and wanted to take, then that's fine. But if you're saying to one person, oh, okay, yeah, you can have additional time off, you can work from home on a phased return, and somebody in the same job role suffered a very similar loss, you're not allowing that flexibility to, that's likely to land you in hot water and potentially amount to discrimination, dependent, of course, upon the circumstances. So it's always going to be on the first port of call, speak to that member of staff. How do they feel they would be best supported? What do they want to do? Ultimately, you're going to get more out of them with that approach. However, if it isn't something that you can do or isn't something that's going to be possible, consider why that is. And if it has been done before and there is any level of precedence set, do be very, very careful in your explanation and your justification as to why that's no longer something that you can do or support with that particular member of staff. You don't want to end up in a situation whereby, for example, you have allowed 3 women who have lost a parent to have a phased return or temporarily work from home, but the men in comparable job roles have not been allowed such flexibility. Again, if there is justification, that's fine. And if you are unsure, seek advice, get in touch and just ask the question and we can talk it through and let you know where the risks are in the flexibility that you're wanting to offer. As I say, first port of call, speak to the members of staff, see how best they would feel supported. Offer signposting to counselling. So do you have any employee assistance programs? Do you have private healthcare? Do you have Westfield? They probably offer some form of counselling. It may be as part of the package. It may be online. It may be just over the telephone. But if you don't feel equipped to have these conversations in terms of the emotional support, there is lots and lots of support out there for different types of bereavement. Parental bereavement, if there is stillbirth, miscarriage, there is certain specific support systems there. Samaritans, that's a free service. You can absolutely feel free to direct your members of staff to those additional places of support. We have listed a couple of examples there. And ultimately, if you do feel like your members of staff are really, really struggling, you're absolutely fine to suggest that they do speak to their GP. They do get assistance with their physical or mental health. And if need be, you can refer to occupational health. That's fine. I have a lot of clients that ask me, oh, I don't think they're well enough to come back into work, but I don't want to say anything, or I don't want to overstep the mark. You can make these suggestions. That's not something, of course, that you can enforce, but you can ultimately suggest, if you feel this would benefit you, please do speak to X, Y, and Z, and they will be able to help you and support you further to then get to a position where they are able to consider a return to work. And that's where your support steps up. And again, if you do have any employee assistance programs or external support as part of your benefits package, then that's brilliant that you can signpost them to and say, look, this is how the business can support you. This is about what is best for you. And this is something that we already offer. So again, when you are looking at potentially putting any policies together in relation to compassionate leave or any kind of communication in relation to bereavement or compassionate leave, it would be absolutely recommended to put that signposting within there as well. So if staff are looking at those policies prior to even notifying you of any loss, that's something that they may be able to do anonymously or without even consulting you about it. So that's going to offer an additional layer of support without them needing to come to you in the first instance. Line managers, as I say, these difficult conversations generally are in relation to your management team. People will go to their line managers as their first port of call or their HR department. Hopefully, if you're part of HR or deal with your internal HR, you're on this call. So you're already taking steps to understand how to handle those difficult conversations. I'm sure you can probably all think of one or two people within your organisation that you may have a bit of a hand to face situation when they've not handled a conversation with sensitivity or as you would have particularly liked them to. Now, that initial conversation, A, is going to be really, really difficult for that member of staff to even have in the first place. So it's potentially taken them quite a lot to regurgitate all the things that have led to this situation, that have led to this unfortunate circumstance or this bereavement. And they may find it really difficult. They may not want to have a phone call or a face-to-face conversation. They may put it in writing. And written correspondence of this nature can be read in many different ways than what it was intended. So do be very, very careful with any written correspondence in relation to any communication around bereavement leave. Make sure the niceties are definitely in that written communication to ensure that it's not being read in a way in which it wasn't intended. It's much, much easier when you're having a telephone call or a face-to-face conversation to show your expression and show your empathy in the tone of your voice, in the speed of your voice, in your eye contact, in your body language. None of that comes across in emails or written correspondence. So do bear that in mind when you are speaking to your management team about how to have these difficult conversations. Now, there's not necessarily well, you may not feel there is necessarily a need for bereavement conversation training as such. However, how to have a difficult conversation. This can look a number of different ways. Is a difficult conversation informing someone they're at risk of redundancy? Is a difficult conversation informing somebody that another member of the team, may have been bereaved? Not necessarily something that they're going to come to you with. It may be something that you need to communicate to your staff. And these types of conversations, as I say, take shape in many, many different ways, but all require sensitivity and support when you're protecting your employee well-being, when you are communicating that type of news. As I say, any telephone call or face-to-face call is much, much more likely to result in less risk of claims or complaints from mishandled situations. Line managers know how they need to be dealing with this. They've been spoken to in terms of active listening. How do you actively listen to somebody and allow them to get to what they need to tell you in their own time, rather than, okay, I'm in a rush. Can we get to the bottom of it? What is it you need to tell me? How much time off do you need? Oh, that's going to be annoying. All right, anyway, that's fine. See you later. That's not going to be the best way to handle those conversations. I've seen them happen in that way. And the manager may not consider that there's been any issue with that whatsoever, but that member of staff has gone away feeling unimportant, um, feeling like their situation, which to them may be the worst thing that has happened to them so far in their life, is just an irritant to the business. It's just going to be annoying to their manager and to the business. And they may then, that may compound their worries and their stress. They may be really passionate about their job and want to do well, but currently their personal circumstances are prohibiting them from doing so. And if they feel that they are not being supported in that way, could lead to further issues, later down the line, even once they have returned to work or feel more comfortable to continue working. They are going to remember that conversation and how that conversation went and how they felt once they came away from that conversation. So we need to ensure that their first port of call, the people that they will be going to have these initial conversations, are trained in how to do that. So as I say, as I said at the beginning of this slide, I'm sure you've all got one or two people within your organisation that you can think of, oh, I really hope nobody goes to them about that. They're the risk, okay? They're the people that need to be trained in how to handle these sensitive or delicate conversations, because if they come to you or if they go to somebody that would treat a conversation like that with sensitivity and with respect, then you're already in a much better position. But of course, that's not always the way that it's going to work. That's not always the route that you can maneuver people down. Providing clarity on policies, leave, and available support. If somebody is going to their manager with a request or to say, unfortunately, this has happened over the weekend, how much leave do I get is going to be one of their first questions. How much time off am I allowed? Will I be paid? When will you need me back in work? Do I need to go off sick? Do I need to get a sick note? They're going to be very unsure, especially if this is the first time this has ever happened to them. What do they need to do when they've also got 1,000 different other things to be thinking about because of what's happening in their personal life? So if your managers are already clued up 100% on, right, okay, if this is what's happened, then initially this will be the leave. You've got 5 days of compassionate leave. We'll then have a look at what's going to be necessary after that. Again, if you want to provide discretion to that, again, dependent upon the circumstances, then absolutely. And again, the pay obligations that come with that. If your managers know what the baseline is, what they absolutely will get, a conversation can be had later down the line in relation to any additional support that's then going to be provided. Preventing inappropriate language or assumptions. As I say, you've all seen those types of conversations whereby someone's, assuming, oh, is that your fifth grandparent to lose while she'd been in business with us? Oh, right, okay. Those not so helpful assumptions or language used in those conversations are going to be huge risks for the business moving forward in how you're dealing with that. So again, that line management training, that is your area of risk with those managers. Generally, employees who have felt supported through difficult times tend to be the loyal employees. If they feel that you've invested or spent time supporting them, they're going to be supporting the business. They're going to do what they can to get back into the business. And they're not going to be the ones that are looking for other jobs, then creating a recruitment cost, a recruitment problem. If anybody attended our conference, our employment law conference earlier on this year, the cost of the recruitment process to a business is absolutely insane when you take into consideration from when an employee decided they were checking out, they're no longer bothered about working for this business, to them leaving, working their notice period again, potentially quite checked out, not being as productive as they may be able to be. the cost of the recruitment, whether you're using an agency, whether you're spending time interviewing, spending time going through CVs, you're not spending time on your business. The cost of then other members of staff training the new start. All these things must be taken into consideration. So retention is much, much cheaper than recruitment. So if you have got that support system in place, it's much more likely to produce loyalty within those staff members. So in how to do this with your managers, I wanted to pass through to Margaret, who is a bereavement counsellor and should be able to provide us with some really helpful tips and tricks on what we need to be telling our management team and how to have these conversations with bereavement. So, Margaret, can you move your slides, or would you like me to do it for you? I can be Chris Whitty and
can you
next
do
slide,
it for
please.
me? Is that okay?
Absolutely, not a problem.
Is my sound okay for everybody? Yeah, okay, right. Thank you for inviting me, Hannah. My name's Margaret Harrison. I was the head of care services at Western Park Cancer Charity. I'm a nurse of 42 years, so I've dealt with bereavement for quite a long time with patients, with colleagues, and I've also delivered sessions such as this as well. Sorry, I've got a bit of feedback, so excuse me if it sounds a bit weird. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Right, so many of you listening here today will have gone through your own bereavement process, I'm sure, and you'll know that it's very variable. It can depend on a huge number of things: how old somebody is when they're going through a grieving process, male and female differences. We know that male and females can sometimes react very differently. The life experience, the relationship with the deceased. We often assume that a relationship is close. Say somebody says, my mother, my father's just died, and we make an assumption that they're going to be devastated and it's going to be a really, really difficult grieving process. It depends on the relationship, and it may be that it wasn't such a close relationship, but the great aunt that died 2 weeks ago, who actually brought them up, that could be the most significant relationship for them. And that could be the one that really triggers some huge emotional response in the bereaved person. Some of these things Hannah's already touched on, so I won't go into them too much, but the cultural background, we've talked about the support network, whether somebody's got somebody that they can rely on or they live on their own, the individual personality and coping style, the individual's own health. Now, this can really impact somebody's emotional attitude and emotional feelings about the whole bereavement process. Did whoever died, was it a hereditary thing? Is it something that this person themselves is worried about for their own health? And also, really crucially, was the death expected or unexpected? If somebody had been ill for quite a while, then sometimes that means that there's been some period of being prepared. If it's a very unexpected death, then the emotional impact for that individual who's dealing with that can be quite significant. So what we're saying in a nutshell is it's different for everybody. How somebody reacts, there's no right or wrong way. There's so many variables that we won't know about. You know, we've got somebody sitting in front of us, they're showing anger, they're showing just frustration. We don't always understand exactly what is behind all that unless we ask. So a lot of patients, clients who sat in front of me have actually said going back to work was one of the hardest things. And actually one of the most difficult things was nobody really asked how I was. they just seemed to assume I'd had a period of time off. I'd had the funeral, and sometimes these days the funeral can be quite a long way after the actual death. And everybody just assumed that I was fine, and nobody actually asked how I was. And on the other side of that, I've had people sitting in front of me who've said, I don't know what to say. What do I say to somebody who's been bereaved? I've never been bereaved myself. I don't really understand all the emotions that are, they're dealing with. And I'm worried about saying the wrong thing. That's a huge, huge worry, whether you're a manager, whether you're a colleague, whether you're a friend, whoever you are. It's a huge worry. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset them. And bereaved people, more often than not, will say, you can't upset me more than I'm already upset. So bringing up the death, asking how they are, would they like to talk about it, is okay. A simple question, would you like to talk about it? We don't always ask that. Sometimes that's because maybe you don't want to open a can of worms and, if they say yes, how am I going to deal with that? But actually, sometimes it's just sitting there and listening. Hannah, if you could just move on, that would be great. So somebody called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was an American-Swiss psychiatrist in the last century. She developed a model called the Kubler-Ross grief process. And these are the 5 stages. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So these are the stages that people traditionally go through when they've had a bereavement. What's important to say is that this is not a linear process. So somebody might start off in complete denial about this death, this bereavement. They may jump straight to depression. They may not get angry. They may not go into the bargaining, oh, if I'd done this, or if I should have done this, or maybe if I do this in the future. They may not get to that. The stages that they go through to get to acceptance, Hannah has already said, there's no time limit on that. For some people, it can be a few months, few weeks, few months, depending on the relationship, depending on that individual. For some people, it can be years, and it needs patience from the people who are dealing with that person. So just touching a little bit on anger. It's a very common reaction to death, to bereavement. Anger kicks in for almost everybody at some point. How do we deal with that in the workplace? Sometimes it obviously manifests itself in being angry at a colleague, being angry at a situation, being angry in a meeting. And we assume that that's what is the root cause of the anger. Somebody who's bereaved, invariably, it's just the frustration, and it manifests itself in anger in a work situation. How do we deal with that? Then it's just sitting that person down. Obviously, we can't tolerate people kicking off in the workplace, kicking off in meetings, even if they are bereaved. That needs managing, it needs handling. So it's a question of sitting that person down and just asking, what is it? What is the problem? Is it the workload? Hannah's touched on that already, that sometimes it can be difficult to manage. Is it the person they're sitting next to who is just blasé with them about the bereavement, or they're talking about their own bereavement all the time and it's driving this person mad and they can't deal with that? They need to be moved away from that person for a while. It's getting to the root cause of that anger. Sometimes, obviously, I've worked the last 25 years of my career, I've worked in the cancer field, a very common reaction to people going through cancer or people who are bereaved due to cancer is they're angry at the cancer. So they're angry at the condition. It doesn't make sense being angry at a condition. So you're angry at something else. You're angry at something that's gone off at work. You're angry at the person next to you who's irritating you. But quite often, the root cause is actually anger at the situation, anger at how it was handled at the hospital, how it was for the person in their last sort of days, weeks of dying. Were they looked after properly? Did they feel as though they weren't looked after properly? So just letting the person know that you are ready to listen and find out what is causing that issue for them is one of the most important things that you can do. Look past the anger and try and find out what it is that's causing that anger. And as we've already touched on, there are support services out there if it's something that they need some more professional help with. Okay, thanks, Hannah. So dealing with these emotions, we know many of us will have been through these emotions. Grief is painful. Anger, sadness, feeling overwhelmed are a natural part of the process. It's absolutely natural. The person may feel as though they're not behaving naturally, but it is part of the process, and it's the journey to that acceptance at the end. So don't ignore the subject of grief. That's what we try and encourage people. Dare I say, you sort of traditionally in the England, it's been sort of stiff upper lip, don't talk about things. People don't generally heal if they keep things bottled up. So not ignoring the subject of the grief is really important. How are you? Is there anything that you need from me? Is there anything I can do to help? Do they want to talk about it? The simple question, as I said earlier, do you want to talk about it? They may not. That's absolutely fine. We need to respect their boundaries. But sometimes just somebody saying that simple sentence may just open up an opportunity for this person to talk that they've not had previously. Have they accessed grief counselling? Do they want to? We've talked about that already. This is an interesting one, and I've had a lot of bereaved people talk about this. Well, I've gone back to work. They clearly don't know what to say to me, my colleagues, so they try and jolly me along, and they tell me about the works night out, or am I looking forward to Christmas, or what am I doing for my holidays, and they try to jolly them along, ignoring the big elephant in the room. So again, it's just being aware that events looming like summer holidays, like Christmas, can be very triggering for people, and jollying them along and trying them to get them to enjoy that is not generally the right way to sort of help them through this period. So again, asking simple questions, Christmas is coming up, is that going to be difficult for you? And just acknowledging that you know that it may be an issue for them. People not sharing their own experiences and stories unless asked for. This can actually trigger quite significant anger in people. If the thing they're dealing with, it's the biggest thing for them at that moment in their time, but every time they talk to so-and-so, whether it's their manager, whether it's a co-worker, all they do is talk about, well, I remember when my dad died, or when my mum died, I struggled with this or this, and it turns into being about them. This can cause anger, but it can also cause the person to withdraw. Nobody's really interested in listening to how it is for me. All they want to do is talk about themselves. So again, it's just something to be aware of, to let your line managers know that it's really, really important to give the person the opportunity to talk about their experience without sharing your own experience. They may ask, And if that's the case, that's fine. You know, have you been bereaved? How did you cope with it? How did you deal with it? That's absolutely fine. It's a phrase, I know how you feel. That's the phrase that really, really makes people who bereave angry. I've heard it said to people, and I've heard people turn around and say, no, you don't. How can you possibly know how I feel? Because we don't know what that relationship was. You know, it might be their mum or dad, and you think, oh, well, I know how I felt when I lost my mum or dad. But this is different. So not saying, I know how you feel, avoiding giving unsolicited advice, apart from maybe signposting to some support services, but giving them advice about what they need to do. You know, they need to get out more, they need to see friends. You know, that may not be the thing that they need to do. And that can trigger emotions that, as I said, can then kick off in the workplace. You think it's about something else, what they're being angry about, but actually it comes back to something has been said or something has been done, and they just feel angry and aggrieved, and nobody's really asked them how they felt about it. Okay, thanks, Hannah. So showing empathy. How do we show empathy? It's actually quite simple. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear about your mum, dad, friend. Is there anything I can help with? Is there anything I can do? That's the most simple empathic statement or question that somebody can ask. Showing active listening skills, not interrupting, not, you know, looking as though you're desperately trying to get in and say your bit or tell them about your experience when your loved one died. So active listening skills, you know, the phone is on silent, somebody's sitting in front of you, you're looking, giving eye contact, you're making them feel like the most important person in the room at that moment in time. Staying calm. If the person's angry, again, it's really important that you know, a line manager, an individual doesn't react to that anger with anger. So staying calm. They may need a minute or two just to have a rant about something. Quite quickly, that can dissipate, and you can have a conversation about what it was that triggered that anger, and then from there, what you can do to help. Asking questions. Have they got anybody to support them? Is there anyone or anything in the workplace that's particularly difficult to deal with at that present time? I think Hannah's already covered that. But it's just being aware that this is probably one of the most difficult times in their life. It's not going to be a quick process for a lot of people, and it will need patience. It will need understanding, and but it will pay off hugely if this person feels supported, feels listened to. Then it can really help them get to that end stage of acceptance. Work can be a comforting place for people. It can be somewhere where they can go and forget about the bereavement. Going home at night to an empty house is difficult for some people. But so making that workplace, that workspace, a haven for them, if you possibly can, in terms of support, understanding, time, is one of the most important things that you can do. Okay, thanks, Hannah. So in trying to describe what empathy is, this kind of sums it up. Sometimes when I'm having a dark day and I can't see the light, I don't really need you to try and put it on for me. What I really need is for you to sit with me in the darkness till it passes. That's all. So they don't need fixing. You can't fix what they're feeling, what they've dealt with, what they've got to face in terms of maybe years on their own because this is their partner they've lost or their child or whoever. We can't fix somebody's grief all we can do is be there, is listen and show empathy, show caring, show that we're interested in how they are, and we are interested in finding out what we can do to help. Okay, thanks, Helen. Just to sum up, we've talked a lot about what to say. One of the things, as I said earlier, people worry, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Remember, saying the wrong thing can actually be undone even. So if, for example, you think, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that, that sounded really insensitive, all you need to do is say what you're thinking. I'm so sorry. That sounded a little bit insensitive, or it sounded as though I wasn't listening, or I'm really sorry. So just if something feels as though it's not gone well in a conversation, just acknowledge it and move on from that. Words have the power to create change, foster connection, help someone overcome challenges, and feel less alone in whatever they're facing. And the workplace can be a really, really important place for helping somebody to feel less alone. And that's a really important message I just want to leave you with. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of sort of, emotions and grief and bereavement. And if anybody, feels as though they need to some more input on that, then just get in touch with Bhayani Law, and we can have a discussion about coming to a workplace or doing some workshops or anything that might be helpful in terms of grief and bereavement. My background, as I say, has been in cancer for the last 25 years. So managing cancer in the workplace, managing bereavement in the workplace due to cancer it's Western Park Cancer Charities speciality. So we're here to help and support you if you need that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Margaret. That's brilliant. Thank you. It's been really, really helpful with, a lot of the stuff that, as I say, I don't feel particularly equipped to deal with myself. So sorry, my laptop was just having a moment. So I just wanted to potentially kind of whiz through a couple more slides because I really wanted this really covered a lot of what Margaret was saying, to be honest. Don't assume silence means they're fine. Check in sensitively, be flexible. A lot of what Margaret was really touching on there. So I won't spend too much time going over this slide. But those proactive strategies to support mental health in the workplace, as we say, regular training for managers on recognising and responding to those issues, wellbeing initiatives, mindfulness. Do you have a mental health first aider or a mental health champion? You can create that peer support network. It doesn't all have to be at the more senior levels. And generally reviewing workload and expectations for grieving employees. If you can spot that somebody is struggling, taking into consideration what Margaret was saying about all those variables. Who is the person that they have lost? Was it expected? Was it unexpected? What are the circumstances? And it may be that their workload or the targets that have been set for them may need to be reviewed or amended slightly to prevent burnout, to prevent later periods of sickness absence or presenteeism, as we previously discussed. Bereavement policies. So as I said at the very beginning, it's very unlikely there's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to creating a compassionate leave policy. However, the first questions, as I say, generally from members of staff are, what do I need to do? Who do I need to tell? How much time can I have off? When are you going to expect me back at work? Those clear guidelines and that general guidance for that initial period of compassionate leave is going to be the first port of call. So do you have a compassionate leave policy that sets out the entitlement for your staff, how much time, when they would be eligible for that leave? So different types of loss, as Margaret very correctly pointed out, assuming that they need a certain amount of time for a certain member of their family may not be the best approach. They may have very, very different relationships. And family and friends, if they lost a member of their family that they've not spoken to in the last 10 years, compared to their best friend who may not be a member of their family, but speak to daily, live very close by, it's likely to have quite a different impact on them. But your policy may only be for immediate members of their family. You don't get any time off for other types of loss. So it's taking those things into consideration. I know some businesses even provide an additional day of compassionate leave if they were to lose a pet. There's a number of different types of leave and those circumstances that have the impact on the members of staff. So, I'm not necessarily saying you need to create boxes to put people in your policy to say, right, if it's mum, dad, brother, sister, you get this much time. If it's aunts or uncles, you get this much time. But maybe making it a little bit looser, a little bit broader. If there is someone in your immediate circle, you may, initially be entitled to 2 days of compassionate paid leave. After that, a review will take place as to the circumstances around that. And that's when you can speak to the members of staff, speak to the management team that work directly with them. What do you know about that relationship and the circumstances that have led to this? As I say, guidance for managers on responding to bereavement sensitively. If they've got a text or an email because that member of staff did not feel comfortable picking up the phone to discuss the situation, how are they responding? Are they picking up the phone to have a conversation with them? If they are sending an email or a text response, just ensuring that the parameters of what they're saying, if they just kind of like the message or thumbs up, it's not very sensitive. It's not going to be the best approach that we would be recommending for that communication from the line managers. Within your policy, again, considering those cultural differences in grieving practices, if you allow an additional day off for the funeral, does the funeral only last one day? Does that period of grieving only last one day? If you allow additional days off for anniversaries, potentially for loss, again, how long can they take that for? In what circumstances? So just considering the indirect effect that may have on different people from different backgrounds. Regularly review the policy to ensure its relevance and its sensitivity. I do know that some policies that we draft or we send out are very much the basic obligations and the basic guidelines. They don't necessarily read that well. As I say, from the previous point that I made in relation to the written correspondence can be received in a very different way to how it was intended. You have to work a little bit harder to show that empathy and to show that sensitivity in written correspondence compared to your verbal correspondence or reading body language. So you need to work a little bit more to make sure that policy reads in a sensitive and compassionate way. And also ensure that the policy links in with your wider wellbeing policies, absence management, mental health strategies. Are you referencing or referring them to other areas within the business that can support them? So, if they do exceed what you allow for compassionate leave or what the statutory minimum is for example, parental bereavement leave, at what point are they going to need to get a sick note if they are unwell and unable to attend work because of these personal circumstances? So we do have a bereavement policy. So if you do feel like that's something that you're missing and you want to get in touch, again, let me know. Or if you do want further support for your managers, your team in having those difficult conversations, again, that is also something that we can support you with. I did want to touch on this specific type of leave because I think it was back in 2022. This was something that the government set out as a statutory obligation that employees who lose a child under the age of 18 or suffer a stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy are entitled to a specific type of leave, and that's parental bereavement leave. Now, hopefully you all have a policy specifically in relation to parental bereavement leave, but if you don't, again, please let me know because this is something that you really should have. The statutory entitlement is up to 2 weeks leave, and this can be taken together or separately within 56 weeks of the loss. And there is also a pay that comes with that if you are eligible for that type of pay, and that's £187 per week or 90% of your salary, depending which one is lower. Now, you're probably looking at that thinking, you've lost a child and you're telling me I need to just give them 2 weeks leave. Who in their right mind is going to be able to come back to work after 2 weeks? This is the statutory minimum. So this is something that you have to provide. If you want to provide more than that, and again, dependent upon the circumstances, it may or may not be something that the member of staff needs or that you are able or willing to support. But if you want to provide more than that, you are absolutely well within your rights to do so. And again, that can generally be at your discretion. But this is the statutory minimum. So before this law came in a couple of years ago, there was no statutory minimum. There was nothing that stated if you lost a child, you have a minimum amount of leave that your employer has to allow you to take. It was very much up to the discretion of the employer. So this is something that the government, or the previous government, saw and obviously highlighted a gap. But as I say, if you want to provide that that period of leave at full pay, at half pay, as long as you're above or meeting at least the statutory minimum, then that's fine. As I say, and you can do more. But this policy, as I say, it's something that we would always recommend that you have. It provides clarity and reassurance at such an incredibly difficult time for staff. It ensures managers understand their legal obligations and to handle the situation consistently in the correct way. Hopefully, this isn't a policy that you will need, or at the very least not need very consistently, but it is there in those circumstances because unfortunately these things do happen. It also demonstrates best practice beyond any minimum legal requirement. So if you were to increase the allowance for that leave, that is something that can be discussed and communicated. This is the statutory minimum. This is what we are allowing as a workplace, which is a greater period of leave. It's not just a standalone, so you can have the 2 weeks for parental bereavement leave. You can have an additional period of compassionate leave, additional period of paid leave for enhanced support, and then into potentially sickness absence, or as I say, if there is further flexibility that you can offer in relation to amended working hours, amended working practices, working from home, flexible working, and those types of things. Okay, so this is just a very specific type of bereavement leave, but it is a change in the law that happened in the most recent years and is something we wanted to flag to your attention. So, as I say, generally policies, as a boring employment solicitor, some of you may define me as, I suppose, policies is where we would always recommend you get these things in writing, but of course we do appreciate that in these types of sensitive situations, very unlikely to have that one size fits all approach. So if you wanted a policy that sets out the kind of bare bones of your obligations, and this would be the minimum, you can then take on a case by case basis at your discretion, dependent upon those variable factors Margaret was talking us through, what's going to be most appropriate for you. Okay. Fab. So if anybody does have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box or do feel free to send us an email. It is bang on 1 o'clock according to my watch. So thank you very much, Margaret. We hit exactly the timing that we wanted to. I have just popped on the screen when our next couple of training events are. So we have a HR Exchange meetup. So that's an in-person event about making emotional conversations easier in the workplace. So very similar to today, but it's going to be face-to-face and about those general emotional conversations, not necessarily just in relation to bereavement, but also in relation to performance management, redundancy, all types of emotional conversations. We've then got a HR exchange in relation to mediation and another one in relation to family leave later on this year. And all of those events are free. So if anybody wishes to attend, the details are on there. And yes, thank you ever so much for coming. Thank you, Margaret.